أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله وحده والصلاة والسلام على من لا نبي بعده أما بعد Inshallah ta'ala this evening we will continue in our series of lessons in the seerah of our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sallam. And our last gathering, we discussed, or we began discussing the hijrah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we talked about how the hijrah was a command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The command to make hijrah and the place to make hijrah to. All of that was by the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we said that the first person al-Itlaq to leave Mecca and go to Medina was who? Mus'ab ibn Umayr. Is that correct? Abu Salama. Mus'ab ibn Umayr was the first person after what? After the Bay'ah. He was the person, him and Ibn Maktoum, the Prophet ﷺ sent them to Medina to teach the people the Quran. And so, the i'tibar, or we look at it from the angle of after the Bay'ah, after the Ansar came and gave the Pledge of Allegiance to the Messenger alayhi salatu wasalam, yes, Mus'ab ibn Umayr was the first. However, there was someone else who actually was there before Mus'ab ibn Umayr even arrived. Do you remember? I mentioned how long he was there. Did anybody remember how long before Mus'ab actually arrived, or how long before the hijrah, the command of the hijrah? How long was it that Abu Salama actually left to go to Medina? It was about a year. And we're going to see that in just a moment, inshallah ta'ala. And that's important because we're going to discuss the hijrah of Salama today, inshallah ta'ala. We're going to discuss some of one of the narrations where she herself discusses some of the trial. I'll take this one, inshallah. You know the camera can see you even over there, right? You're the one who got the camera. Inshallah has extensive view, mashallah. So we're going to see how Quraysh, they tried their best to stop the hijrah, to stop the people from leaving. And sometimes they did different things. They would threaten them. They would put an embargo on their wealth, like a lockdown on their wealth, which was the case with Suhaib al-Rumi. And we talked about his situation before, when Suhaib radiallahu anhu, when he went to leave, and the people of Quraysh, they crowded around him and said, you think you're going to come here and then you're going to make all this money and you're going to leave with your money? And so he kind of casually got off of his riding animal and was like, look, fellas, y'all know who I am and y'all know what I can do. None of you are going to get to me until I run out of arrows. You're going to start charging me, and I'm going to start shooting my arrows, and you're not going to get to me until I run out of arrows. And then I have this sword, and I'm going to take out a few more. I'm going to take out a few more of you with my sword. And there are more of you than there are of me. And I may die, but I'm not going to die until you all realize that I'm a man. So why don't we do this? Why don't we do this? You all take the money, and I'll leave. And they agreed. So they took the money, and Suhaib radiallahu anhu got on his riding animal and he left without anything of his wealth. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the verse, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَشْرِي نَفْسَهُ بِابْتِغَاءِ مَرْضَاتِ اللَّهِ وَاللَّهُ رَءُوفٌ بِالْعِبَادِ. And from the people there are those who purchase themselves for the pleasure of Allah, to the end of the ayah. The point is that Quraysh, they use different tactics and different means that they had available to them to really try to stop the Sahaba from migrating and leaving from Mecca to Al-Madinah. They did not want the Aqidah of Islam, or the religion of Al-Islam, the belief system of Al-Islam. They didn't want that to continue. They did not want that to continue. It wasn't that they just didn't want the Muslims around, because if it was just that they didn't want the Muslims around, they would have said, all right, good riddance, y'all go ahead, leave. But they tried to stop them. They wanted it contained. They wanted it contained. That way they would be able to control the narrative. They wanted to be able to control, because partially, as we talked about in our earlier classes, partially the reason why, or some of the reason why they were against Islam, because it had an effect on their economic system. Because remember, the Arabs used to migrate to Mecca because the Kaaba was what housed the quote-unquote their gods. And if we remove all the gods, then in their minds is what do the Arabs have to, what do they need us for if we remove all of the gods and then there's only one God in the sky? And then that would hurt them economically. And when it removed them in their position of political status and power from amongst the rest of the Arab tribes, which Quraysh enjoyed safety, part and partial, because of the influence that they had over the other Arab tribes. Remember, we talked about their the rihla, the two trips, the one to Asham and the one to Yemen, one in the winter, one in the summer. Remember, this was what was implemented in order to keep people alive. Remember, people were starving. Quraysh was poor for a long time. They were poor. They had no money. And so this system was implemented as a means to be able to keep wealth flowing throughout the tribe. And so they enjoyed safety. They could travel from Mecca all the way to Syria and back, and no one would bother them. They can travel from Mecca all the way to Yemen and back, no one would bother them. And so this Aqeedah of Islam that removes this idea of having gods that are housed at the Kaaba, then it removes, in their mind, it removes them from positions of power, and it removes them from being in a position to obtain wealth. And so for that reason, or for this reason and other reasons, they didn't want the religion of Al-Islam to continue. Not that they just didn't want the Muslims around. They didn't want the religion of Al-Islam to continue. They didn't want it to spread. And so they used multiple means to cause trouble and try to prevent people from making the hijrah. One of the families that was impacted by the methodology of Quraysh in trying to prevent the people from making the hijrah was the family of Abi Salama. And in the Ibn Hisham, in his book of the Seerah, he gives us a narration. He brings with this chain of narration. Inshallah ta'ala, it is safe to use for historical context. There are no, and Allah knows best, there are no religious implications, meaning there are no ahkam, there's no aqidah. And so some of the narrations that we used to use that we're discussing, like Mecca before that, during the time of Ismail and after Ismail, some of those narrations about history, they don't get put through the same level of vigor that narrations that have to do with, ahkam and aqidah, they don't get put through the same thing, because we're just discussing history, and it doesn't require the same level of authentication. And this is one of those narrations that, even though a person may come and say, well, what about this one issue here? Say, okay, no problem, because the da'f that is in it is not necessarily, if it was a hadith that had to do with, salat or siyam, then I would agree, maybe, we should hold off and do a little bit more investigation. But because this narration is simply stating historical events, then the ulama of hadith, they didn't used to put the same level of criteria on these types of narrations that they did on narrations that had to do with aqidah and ahkam and things that impacted worship or impacted belief. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Al-Muhim, Salama, this narration comes directly from Salama herself. When she says, radiyallahu ta'ala anha, once Abu Salama decided to leave to go to Al-Madinah, he placed me on the riding animal, on the ba'ir. He placed me on the riding animal, and he carried me, and along with me, my son Salama ibn Abi Salama. Salama ibn Abi Salama, who was in my lap. And so we see now that Salama at this time was a baby, right, or a small child, small enough to fit in his mother's lap. So she says, she begins the story, Abu Salama decides, we're leaving. So he gets his wife, he gets his baby, puts them on the riding animal, and they start heading out. She continues, she says, so then he left with me while he was driving he was pulling on the riding animal, on the camel. And once the men of Bani al-Mughira ibn Abdullah ibn Amr ibn Makhzum, which is his family. So mind you, Salama, which her name was Hind, the daughter of Abi Umayyah, the daughter of Abi Umayyah. She was from Bani Makhzum, and Abu Salama ibn Abdul Asad was also from Bani Makhzum. They were both from the tribe of, or the sub-tribe, Quraysh of Bani Makhzum. So he says that once his family members saw that he was leaving, once they saw, I'm sorry, not his family, her family members. Once her family members saw that they were leaving, they stood up and they said to him, okay, you may be going. What about our relative? What makes you think that we're going to let you leave with her to travel throughout the earth? Right? They said, look, we don't have any control over you. But what makes you think that we're going to let our sister, we're going to let our cousin, we're going to let our niece, what makes you think we're just going to let you leave with her? No. You can go, but she got to stay. So she said, so they forcefully removed the reins of the ba'ir, of the camel, from his hand, and they took me from him. So they took me from him. She said, then his family, Banu Abdul Asad, which was his brothers, his uncles, and all these people, now they're angry, right? So when her family comes and they take her and the baby. Her family they take her and they take the baby. Now, Abu Salama's family, now they're angry, they're upset. So they say, we swear by Allah, we're not going to let our son be left with her when you removed her from her husband. Right? Because the children in nasab, in lineage, follow who? The father. So they're like, no, he's one of us. You all took her, which in turn, because the baby was still extremely small and tiny. So the baby has to stay with his mother, right? You all took her, and in turn you took the baby. Okay, that's fine. We're not interfering with that. But that boy, he belongs to us. We're not going to let you all keep him, and that boy belongs to us. So she said they ripped my son Salama, or they were pulling and tugging on my son Salama until they ripped him from my hand, and they left off with my son. Now this is the situation here. I'll pause for a second. Now let's make tasawwur. Let's take a look at what's happening. Right? It's Abu Salama, his wife Salama, and at the time their only son Salama. They're heading off. Right? This is their family now, intact. They're all together. And when you have a family, right, if it's you, your wife, and your children, if you were to get stuck on a deserted island, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us all. But if you were to get stuck on a deserted island, it was you, your wife, and your children all together. I mean, you could feel okay. Right? Not that you're going to be okay, but essentially, you guys can make it work because you have your immediate family, you have them all intact and they're all together. Right? So now they're leaving. So the first separation that occurs is Salama and her child are separated from the leader of their household, Abu Salama. That's the first separation. Now Abu Salama leaves. He leaves. He goes to Medina. Abu Salama leaves and he goes to Medina. He left Salama and Salama, he left them behind in Mecca. So now she's in Mecca with her child. Now again, a wife, she's going to miss her husband, but she has her child, and that may be, now she's going to miss her husband, but she has her child to look after, and she's going to feel family connection, right? So then what happens? Abu Salama's family comes and they forcefully remove Salama from his mother. So now she has no husband, no baby. No husband, no baby. Okay, so let's go on. She says, so the Banu Abdul Asad, they forcibly removed my son, and my relatives, they held me captive. He held me captive, and my husband, Abu Salama, he went to Medina. My husband, Abu Salama, went to Medina. She said, so there was separation between me, my husband, and my son. I was separated from my husband, and I was separated from my son. And she said, every morning I would go out and I would cry until the evening. Every morning I would go out, go outside, and I would cry until the evening. فما أزال أبكي حتى أمسي سنة أو قريبا منها. She said, I would go out every morning and I would cry until the evening, and this went on for a year or almost a year. It went on for a year or almost a year. Now imagine a year. She doesn't have her husband. She doesn't have her son. Now her son wasn't like Rida's age, right? Her son wasn't Rida's age. Her son was still in the stage of being, in being in the lap. Like he traveled in his mother's lap, which means he was like infant, at the infant stages. And the mother and how she feels about her baby. Anytime, even when her son is a grown adult, she still feels a connection. But how much more so when the baby is an infant? Her baby is an infant, and she doesn't have any contact with her husband, and she's been removed from contact with her son. And now she's just left for a whole year. She's crying all day. All day she's crying. And she says, until one of my uncles, he passed by me one day and he saw me crying. And he had mercy on me. So he said to the rest of my relatives, why don't you all let this miskina, like called her miskina, why don't you all let this, this poor lady, why don't you let her go? You divided her, you separated her from her husband, you separated her from her child. Why don't you all let her go? Like it's been a year. Come on. Every day she's crying. Like it's a year and she's still crying. How could y'all do that? Like this is your relative. How could y'all see her like this and still you're okay with this? Why don't you just let her go? So my family agreed. They said, go be with your husband if you like. Like if that's what you want to go out in Medina, you want to be away from the family, like we can't protect you out there. We can't do anything for you out there. Our family is here. Our power is here. Our togetherness is here. But if you want to go out there with him and this is what you want to do, you want to chase behind him and follow him, go ahead. Like we're done. Go. And so when Banu Abdul Asad, she said when her husband's family heard that her relatives were allowing her to go to be with her husband, they sent Salama back with her so that Salama can be with her dad. So that Salama can be with the dad and the family can be intact. So she went and she got her camel, and she said she placed her son in her lap. Now, mind you, this is after a year. So when that first happened, Salama must have been extremely young, because she said after this time I put him in my lap, which means that after a year he's still a lap baby. So the first time that this happened, he must have been in his really early stages of being an infant. So she says, so I put my son in my lap, and then I left. I went to seek out my husband in Al-Madinah. And she said, وَمَا مَعِي أَحَدٌ مِّنْ خَلْقِ اللَّهِ. And there was no one with me from Allah's creation. Now mind you, at that time, traveling by yourself as a woman, that wasn't safe. It wasn't safe at all. Right? Women didn't travel by themselves. But she's determined to leave. She grabbed her baby. She went on her riding animal. I'm out. I'm leaving. I'm going to go be with my husband in Al-Madinah. So she said, whoever I meet on the path, I'll go with them. If I run into someone on my way, I'll run into someone, I'm just going to, I will attach myself to their journey, and I'll ride with them. And so she said, she arrived in Tan'im. Y'all know where Tan'im is? Tan'im. You've been to Mecca before? You know where Tan'im is at? Masjid Aisha? That's right, that's that area we call Tan'im. So she got to that area, and she said she met with a man, his name was Uthman ibn Talha ibn Abi Talha, who is one of the members of Bani Abd al-Dar. He's from Bani Abd al-Dar. And he said to me, "Where are you going, O daughter of Abi Umayyah? Where are you going?" Now he addresses her as the daughter of Abu Umayyah out of recognition of her status. Right? He doesn't say Salama, he doesn't call her Hind, he calls her, Bint Abi Umayyah, to give her proper, to recognize, so that she can know that he understands who she is, right? And in that sense, it makes her feel safe, right? It makes her feel safe to tell the truth. Because if he would have addressed her in a different manner, maybe she would have been afraid, maybe she would have hid her intentions, or maybe she would have. Okay, so she said, I'm going to my husband in Medina. He says, don't you have anybody with you? She said, no, wallahi, I have no one except my son. So he says, I swear by Allah, I'm not going to leave you alone. I swear by Allah, I'm not going to leave you to make this journey on your own. Now, mind you, Uthman, radiallahu anhu, Uthman ibn Talha, he eventually accepted Islam. But at this time, he was still a non-Muslim. At this time, Uthman, I don't believe he accepted Islam until after Hudaybiyah. And I can check that, inshallah. But his Islam came much later. His Islam came much later. Radiallahu anhu. But at this time, he was still a non-Muslim. But he says, I swear by Allah, I'm not going to leave you, I'm not going to leave you to make this journey on your own. So she said, so he took the reins of the camel, and he traveled with me. And she said, wallahi, I have never seen a man who, from the Arabs, ever, who was more noble than him. I never traveled or accompanied a man from the Arabs who was more noble than him. She explained that when she needed to get, when they stopped, he would make the camel get like not prostrate, we call it kneel. Yes, very good, thank you. I was looking for the word. He would make the camel kneel, and once the camel kneeled, before she got off, he would step away. And he would always give her space, as she explains. But he would make the camel kneel, and he would ثُمَّ اسْتَأْخَرَ عَنِّي, meaning he would make the camel kneel, and then he would move away, meaning making her feel safe and giving her respect. First and foremost, she's a Muslimah. Secondly, she's married. And this is because it would have been who was out there in the middle of the desert to stop him from to taking advantage of her? No one. She couldn't have protected herself. They're in the middle of nowhere, not in the middle of nowhere, but in the middle of the desert. If she screamed, nobody's going to hear. Even if he didn't try to violate her in that way, he could have made the camel go down and then stayed there, and as she's getting off, looking at her or sizing her up and down, all of that would have made her uncomfortable. So, but what he did was he made the camel kneel down, and then he would take a step backwards. He would turn away, so that she can get off and get on to the camel in a way that was comfortable for her. She goes on and she says, he would take the camel. When she got off the camel, he would go then grab the reins of the camel, and then he would go and he would tie the camel up to a tree, and then he would go off to the tree, and he would rest. He would take the rest underneath of the tree, meaning he would be away from her. But he didn't ever have any try to have interactions with her, to try to flirt with her. or to try to get close to her. He didn't do any of that. And so she said, once they, this was the case until they reached to the outskirts of Al-Madinah. And so she said, once he saw the Qarya of Bani Amr ibn Auf at Quba, he said, your husband is here. Once he saw the houses of Bani Amr ibn Auf in Quba, once they got close to Quba, he said, look, this is where your husband is. And Abu Salama is here. So go be with your husband ala barakatillah. She said, he told her, go be with your husband with Allah's blessing. And then he left her and he went back to Medina. He left her and went back to Medina. I mean, all of that for a woman. Afan. That's what I meant. I said Medina. He went back to Mecca. He went back. He met her in Tan'im. Where are you going? I'm going to Medina. Who's with you? Who are you going with? No one, just me and my son. No, I can't let you do that. You're not going to do that by yourself. I'm going to make sure that you get there. And he took her all the way to Medina. Once they saw, mind you, he could have, and this is the type of stuff that men do, right? Men have a tendency to do stuff like this, right? He could have walked her all the way into the city, right? And be like, hey, Abu Salama, your wife? Here you go. Right? And then left. And almost as a way to like say, like, I have one up on you, or to be able to stick his chest out and to puff or to brag or to like to show like I have some type of fadl over you or something like that. He didn't do that. When they got to, and he wasn't Muslim. Again, he wasn't Muslim. He was not Muslim. When they got to a place where she can see and they can see the houses where Abu Salama was, he pointed and said, look, your husband's over there. Go ahead, you can go. Ala barakatillah. He turned around and he went back to Mecca. Turned around and he went back to Mecca. That's about 400 kilometers. No, I'm saying I'm trying to figure that out. It's a 4-hour drive, but how long does it take to walk? What's it take, 2 weeks? I don't know, how long would it take you to walk that distance in the desert? Yeah, it would. Now, mind you, they're walking because they weren't riding together. He was pulling her. He's pulling her. She's on the camel, and he's pulling it. So how long does that take? I don't know, 2 weeks? I don't know. I mean, I've never made the trip before, but I know that's a long journey. Especially you're riding, you're going through the desert. There's no shade for the most part of the trip. Mountains, as you mentioned, very mountainous. There's rocks. It's not very comfortable. I mean, now, alhamdulillah, they have lights and streets and stuff, but at that time they didn't have that. And so you have a straight line now with the streets. You have a straight line, but you had at that time because you can't walk over. You're trying to be as comfortable as possible. You have a camel. You can't take the camel over mountains, so now you have to go in zigzag, and so it takes a much longer trip than just like nowadays. But even nowadays, if you're just walking on the road on Tariq Medina, you just get on the road from Mecca and you walk on Tariq Medina with the asphalt and the lights. It's still going to take a very, very long time. And so this incident, it shows us some of the hardships and the trials that some of the Sahaba they faced when trying to leave Mecca to go to Medina to to perform, to perform the hijrah. How many of us, for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, would do what Abu Salama did? Leave his wife and his baby. And say, I'm leaving for Allah. How many of us, how many of our wives would have did what Salama did? And say, look, because, maybe somebody would feel like, a woman would feel like, oh, my husband, he just left me. Oh man, how could he do that? I'm not getting ready to go through the desert by myself. And this guy, he just left, right? She understood why he left. She understood why he left. She had no problems. Like, that's my husband. I'm going to be with my husband. Why? Because I understood why he left. Because probably if the shoe was on the other foot, she would have left. And she understood what was going on at the time and why he needed to leave. He needed to be away from Mecca. And they were fleeing together. One of the things we also notice from this story, from this incident, is how the tribal biases transcended even their aqidah. Because even though Abu Salama and Salama were both Muslims, and the rest of their family, they weren't Muslims, you can still see their allegiance was based on tribal lines. Their allegiance was based on tribal lines. And their assistance and their nasr, and their support was based on those tribal lines, even though they weren't followers of the religion that they follow. But because we come from the same tribe, that we're going to support our tribal members, even though they're on something that we don't agree with. They're on something that we don't agree with. However, we're family, we're from the same tribe, then we're going to stick together based on those tribal lines. And then so it shows us that how deep that tribal connection ran with them. And it still holds true to today. That still holds true until today. There are many people that they see life through the lens of tribal and family connections. And they don't see the truth for the truth itself, but rather they'll see the truth is supporting my relative. My brother is in trouble. If my brother is in an argument, I'm going to support my brother, my blood brother. I'm going to support him. Why? Simply because he's my blood brother. Meaning, if your brother stole, your brother stole the lawnmower from the neighbor. Now the neighbor is angry and he's upset, and so he comes over banging on the door. Hey, where's my lawnmower? And he's angry. He's upset. And so you pull up and you see the angry neighbor banging on the door, right? And you come in, you just jump in, you grab the guy, throw him down, get out of here, right? Don't ever come back here. But your brother just stole, but yet now you're supporting him. Why? Because he's your brother. And this is the type of blind allegiance that we have, that we find present today. Still to this day, we find this blind allegiance based upon family lines, even though the truth may not be with your relative. Even though the truth may not be with your relative. You'll stand by your relative, you'll lie, you will harm others, you will steal from others just to protect your relative and say, oh, this is my relative. You say, la, we stand for the truth, and this is what should define our stances, and this is what should define our positions. This is these are some of the lessons that are learned from this incident. And there are many others. Inshallah ta'ala, we will want to be able to give time to discuss some of the other stories of the hijrah of others. Inshallah, I think maybe next week we'll talk about the hijrah of Umar or maybe a hijrah of some others before we get to the hijrah of the Prophet. Sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wasallam. So we'll stop here, inshallah ta'ala. If anybody has any questions, we'll take any questions, inshallah. No.